So thanks, Azim and Raman. Today we are going to be talking about leveraging the power of the web platform on Windows. I am Justin Willis, a software engineer at Microsoft. And yeah, I'm very excited to talk about the web on Windows today. So first we'll do, let's go through the agenda real quick. So we're going to do an overview of the modern web platform on Windows. So kind of give you a bird's eye level view of the web on Windows. Then we'll go into progressive web apps specifically on Windows. And then we'll touch on PWA Builder, build your PWAs, and then how app distribution changes with progressive web apps. So yeah, first let's start off with an overview of the modern web platform on Windows. So Windows is the web. So one of the things I want to get across in this presentation is that the web is a big thing for Windows. We want to make sure the web is a top web app platform, a top app platform right there along React Native and all the other standard ways to build apps for Windows. The web should also be, a standard app platform on Windows. So as our first step kind of into evolving the web platform at Microsoft and making sure that it kind of meets those goals of, being an app platform and all the things that come along with that, like performance and developer tools and all kinds of stuff. So the first step in that was moving to Chromium. So what Chromium does is basically it allowed us to focus more on the things that make building web apps, the things that are important for building PWAs. So by moving to Chromium, it kind of embraced the open source aspect that Microsoft is embracing. So for example, by moving to Chromium, we can focus less on actually like building a browser engine and instead focus more on what actually makes like a browser great, what actually makes web apps and websites in a browser great. So I'm going to touch on a few of the things here, but there's much more than this too. So first, powerful Devtools. So with the move to Chromium, with the new Edge, that means that we now have new developer tools. So these maybe, you may recognize these from Google Chrome, but there's a lot of other work that the Edge team is doing in DevTools and making sure that DevTools is great on Edge. We'll touch on a few of those things in a minute. The other big thing is compatibility. So by moving to Chromium, obviously that gives you much more compatibility with the browser, with other browsers. So we all know that as web developers, having something that works in one browser and then doesn't work in another browser is always a very, very frustrating experience. Not only from the CSS aspect, but also the JavaScript side of that. So for example, one browser may support an API that is really important for your app, but another browser doesn't. That can be a big kind of blocker to you being able to ship that experience as a web app. And that's what we want to avoid. Continuing, so performance is another big focus for Edge. So by moving to Chromium, we can join this whole community of people that are working on making sure that Chromium, V8, Blink, all the kind of underlying engine is extremely fast, renders fast, uses less memory, battery life is great, etc. Extensions is another big thing. So I think we all use browser extensions probably. And with the move to Chromium, that means that also your Chromium extensions, so those extensions that you may have built for Google Chrome, will work great on Edge. So, you may need to do some minimal to maybe a little bit more advanced changes, but it's not rewriting an entire extension for another browser. Other cool things that are kind of more developer focused, so release channels. So with the move to Chromium, like other Chromium-based browsers, we have moved to release channels. So with the old Edge, we were tied to the specific version of Windows a specific version of Windows ran a specific version of Edge. With the move to the new Edge, this is not true anymore. Edge is shipped as an independent piece separate from Windows. And this also means that we have release channels. So we have a production channel, which is, the stable channel that most people get. Then we have the beta, the dev, and the canary channels. So you can imagine that as like beta, dev, and alpha channels. That kind of gives you a look into Edge at different points in the development cycle. Other two cool things, origin trials, which basically enables you to turn on APIs for more advanced APIs that may may not be ready to turn on for everyone that uses Edge, but maybe something that you want to start getting used and using in your app. And then WebView 2, which is a brand new web view that uses the same Chromium engine as Edge. Also is shipped independent of Windows now, so it's an independently updatable thing. And yeah, enables you to have Chromium powered web content anywhere in any type of app, no matter what technology you are building with. So let's deep dive into a few of those things. So first, Devtools. So Devtools is, I'm a big fan of Devtools and the new Edge. I spend a lot of time here as my work as a software engineer. I am in Devtools a lot of the time. So I wanted to touch on just a few of the things that make Devtools really cool, and then actually touch on a few of my favorite tools that are in Devtools. So the new Devtools is very, very powerful. It's great for developing PWAs. So a lot of the work that has gone into the Devtools in Chromium has been very specific for PWAs and making sure that you can debug and build progressive web apps using Devtools. Also, Edge Inspect is a new tool that is in the new Edge. So Edge Inspect allows you to inspect even Android devices such as Surface Duo. So you can inspect Edge content running on those devices, and it even enables you to inspect Edge content running on other Windows devices, or even content running in Chrome tabs on Android. And other advanced tools such as the rendering tools and sensor emulation. So I'm only listing a few of the tools here, but even from the screenshot that I have here, you can see there are a lot of other tools in Devtools, such as storage-related things, allowing you to see what you're storing in IndexedDB, session storage, local storage, etc. So some of my favorite tools and some of the tools that kind of the Edge team is focusing on are the accessibility tools that are in Edge. So accessibility has always been a huge focus for Microsoft. And as part of that, we want to make sure that it's easy to build accessible content on the web. So part of that is making it easy to debug your accessibility issues that your site or app may have using Devtools. So this is a big focus for us, and we hope to have, make many more improvements here. But I definitely urge you to check out the accessibility tools that are there. It's very, very cool. Performance tools, so you can, deep dive. It's kind of famous, the performance tools in Chromium Devtools. You can do a super deep dive into very, very granular things, such as which JavaScript call is causing, memory to be allocated here. Why is that memory not going away? How fast did certain things paint? As much detail as you kind of want to get into. And then actually the application tab that's in Devtools too. So we're going to be talking about progressive web apps here in a minute. The application tab that's in Devtools is kind of like that PWA specific section of Devtools that goes into PWA specific things such as manifests and service workers. And we'll touch on that stuff here in a minute. So compatibility was the other big thing I want to talk about with Chromium. So as we know, as the web developers know, there's been many a time, anytime you go to build a web app or a website, you're going to run into things that, something looks great in other browsers, and then in this one browser, it doesn't work. Or, some CSS works here and doesn't work here, or some API is supported here, but not supported in another browser. With the move to Chromium, compatibility is basically a non-issue. Obviously, you should still test your websites and web apps in Edge, but with the move to Chromium, now that we're using this common engine that other browsers use, it means that the likelihood of your code working in Edge, Chrome, Samsung Internet, etc., all the same and consistent across the board is much higher. So this allows you to focus on building your actual website or app experience, your PWA, instead of worried about does my app look correct in this browser and not look correct in another browser. Also, sometimes compatibility can be, I mentioned this earlier, a blocker to actually shipping your app, right? So if, for example, a browser doesn't have an API that is a key part of the experience in your app, it could be a potential blocker to even shipping that as web experience if browsers don't support that API. So with the move to Chromium, this means that Edge, no longer has that compatibility issue that has always been a constant issue for web developers. Also, release channels. So I mentioned earlier, we have release channels now. So a big thing that I'm very excited about with the new Edge is that we're able to ship that as an independent piece separate from Windows. So that means that the Edge that your users are running, the Edge that you're developing with, et cetera, is always going to be up to date with the latest code, latest security fixes, APIs, et cetera. Along with that, we also have release channels. So with the release channels, this means that while production users are going to be using, a version of Edge that gets shipped once it's ready for production and, on a regular, longer cadence of a couple of months, we have the Edge or the Dev, Beta, and Canary channels. Those give you a screenshot kind of into the dev lifecycle of Edge. So what this really enables you to do is to kind of catch bugs before they actually make it into production. So my favorite thing about release channels is it kind of acts as like a CI for your web app. So with release channels, you can run your web app in Canary. So you just go to Edge Insiders, download the Canary version of Edge, test your app right there in Canary real quick, and you can see if there's any bugs or anything that's changed. It also gives you the ability to start work that may use an API that's already in Canary, but it's not in production yet. You can start work on that by testing it in Canary, and then as the API moves along the release channels, it will be in production, and you will be ready to go once it's in production because you've already been able to test before then. So release channels is a big move for Edge, and I'm very excited about this. And finally, on Chromium, origin trials. So origin trials kind of takes that idea that we were just talking about with release channels, where you can get early access into testing certain APIs or even just testing your app and making sure that things work. Origin trials takes that one step further with giving you the ability to turn on certain APIs in your browser or in your app that may not be turned on in general production for Edge. So this gives us the ability to ask web developers, hey, can you test this new API? Here's a token that you can get. Add this token to your index.html, and then you can start testing this API. So this gives us the ability to start testing code and making sure that things work right. Also, more importantly, it gives developers the ability to be in the standards process much earlier, fully transparent. You can even play with the API yourself, and through that be able to give much better feedback and much better guidance into the standard system. So a long time, web standards have been kind of a separate thing that no one really knows about, and it's kind of this like magical thing that happens all to the side. With origin trials, that kind of gives the developer, so any developer, kind of an inside look at some of those APIs being worked on in web standards. All right, so now let's jump into progressive web apps on Windows. So we just kind of gave a high-level overview of the web platform on Windows. So now I want to talk about how progressive web apps fit into that story on Windows. So first, before we actually talk about progressive web apps on Windows, we should probably talk about what a PWA is first, right? So first of all, PWA stands for Progressive Web App. You will probably hear me say PWA during this presentation, mostly just because it's shorter to say, but know that we are talking about a progressive web app. So what is a PWA exactly? So it's mostly a marketing term, but there is some actual meaning underneath the hood. So first, a PWA is a great web app. A web app is an app that runs in the browser and uses web technology to enable the app experience. A progressive web app is a great web app first and foremost. Second, it takes advantage of some modern web APIs such as service workers to enable the app experience. So we're talking about apps here. It's in the name, right? Progressive web app. So these PWAs take advantage of these modern APIs to enable more of an app-like experience. And we'll dive into this deeper here in a second. Also has a web app manifest for app-related metadata. And we'll jump into a second what the web app manifest exactly is. And I'll even show you how we have some tools that can help you make one. But yeah, it's basically something that provides an app-related metadata to the browser. So here's my icons, here's my description for this app, etc. Also, really important, the user experience of a PWA is meant to be an app, right? Not a website. So it's important to remember that you are shipping an app experience on the web. So keep that in mind when you're, developing your UX and your UI, your user flow through your application, etc. It's meant to be an app. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then also progressive web apps, because they are built on the web, they can run on any device that has a modern web browser, right? So it doesn't really matter what the operating system underneath the hood is. PWAs can run anywhere that has a modern web browser. And operating systems can provide different levels of support for that. But yeah, that is basically a PWA. A PWA TLDR is a great web app that takes advantage of some modern web APIs to enable an app-like experience. Now, why would I build a PWA? So I think it's important that we not only talk about what a PWA is, but why would I even build one? So these are kind of the core, reasons why I would build a PWA. There's a lot more out there that you can look, that you'll see people talk about. So first, truly cross-platform with one code base. So this has always been a big thing for the web, and something that web developers have touted is that when you build for the web, you can build one experience. And because that web browser runs on any device, no matter what size it is, what kind of screen it has, etc., how many screens it has, it will run. So PWAs kind of enable that story of shipping an app with one code base. Also, no worries about CPU architecture. So because you're building on the web, it doesn't matter if that machine is running an x86 CPU, an ARM CPU, etc. That's all kind of abstracted away for you. Also, it gives you the ability to deliver a lightweight experience. So we'll touch on this more in a second. But PWAs, by standard, are normally much lighter weight than the equivalent native app. Not always, of course. That kind of stuff depends on a lot of things. But on the average, PWAs are much lighter weight experience. It's also faster to iterate. So because you're shipping a website, it's much faster to iterate, ship updates, etc. You're just deploying to your website like you always would, right? So there's no kind of limit on how many times you can deploy to your website. Makes the update cycle much more transparent and a lot easier to deal with. Low friction for users. So because one entry points for progressive web apps is just going to a URL, because it is still a website, that's extremely low friction for users compared to other ways to get into applications traditionally. And also network resilient by default. So the ability to cache things programmatically and enable an offline experience is something that you get by default with PWAs. And this is not always the case with other technologies. So one thing I wanted to touch on too when we talk about PWAs is always that thing of, but the web can't do that. So there's always been, and I'm going to start one of these videos here while we do this. So there's always been this thing with the web of there's limitations to what web apps can do, right? So there may be APIs that are missing, or just the browser just doesn't have the ability. We are working on that along with other partners such as Google and Samsung with Project Fugu. So Project Fugu is an initiative to enable deeper API support on the web to give you the ability to build any kind of application on the web. Also, these APIs, because we are working on these, they have deep integration with Windows, which you may have seen with some of these videos I had running over on the side. And also WebAssembly is a thing too to remember nowadays. So WebAssembly gives you the ability to take native binaries and run those on the web, which, as you can imagine, opens up a whole new category of applications that can run on the web. So some of the APIs I've listed here, I'm obviously not going to go through all these, but it gives you the ability, gives you an idea of what you could do on the web. So some of the more important ones here, Web Bluetooth, for example. So Bluetooth has been something that normally you would have had to build a native application in the past if you wanted to use Bluetooth in your application. With Web Bluetooth, you can do that from a PWA. DRM content playback. So you can use service workers to cache DRM content offline and enable offline playback of that content, and of course online playback too. Even streaming of it too. So service workers support streaming, and you can do that with DRM content. Other cool ones that I find awesome are file system access. So this gives you that kind of file system API that has never really been in the web. This gives you that ability. So writing files, reading files, asking the user for a directory, etc. And finally, background fetch is also pretty cool. So background fetch enables you to kind of initiate those long downloads in the background on a different thread, so they're not taking up the main thread that the user is using, and enables you to deliver experiences that you wouldn't have been able to ship on the web in the past. And now let's talk about that integration with Windows. So the first thing I wanted to get across here is PWAs are native on Windows. So all of those APIs I just talked about, for example, PWAs themselves, etc., are highly supported in Windows. We have deep integration with the shell. So you can see some of the pictures I have here, for example. When you install a PWA on Windows, it shows up in all the normal places you would expect an app to show up on Windows, in your start screen, in the settings app, in the taskbar, in control, program manager, et cetera, et cetera. You can install PWAs on Windows, both from the browser, so both from Edge and the Microsoft Store. So we'll touch a little bit deeper on that in a second. Also, a PWA is just another app to a user. So it's really important that the user doesn't have any kind of insight into, hey, this app is a web app. It's because I can tell it's not running as well. On Windows, PWAs, run and look. They open up just like any other application. So they get their own application shell, etc. So that means that for the user, the experience that they are getting from a PWA is the exact same kind of experience that they would be getting from any app on Windows. And yeah, just like I said, a PWA is surfaced anywhere native apps are on Windows. And we're doing even more work here to ensure that PWAs are tightly integrated into Windows, that they are just another application that runs on Windows, and that they're not some kind of special off to the side thing. Finally, PWAs work on any Windows device. So for example, here in this image, I have a PWA running on my Surface Pro X. So PWAs run natively on ARM devices. I mentioned this earlier, but you can even develop PWAs on ARM devices with VS Code being compiled for ARM now. This means that you can, because you're building a PWA, you could ship that one PWA and it doesn't matter what CPU the user is using. It's just going to run, and it will run natively, not emulated. Responsive design is another important thing. So responsive design is not a new thing for the web. It's been in the web for a while. But this enables you to ship no matter what kind of size the device is. Pointer events enabling you to no matter what kind of, is it touch, pen, any kind of input, you can use that. Dual screen, so we'll touch on this just a touch at the end. But like Surface Duo, for example, PWAs work there. And then even for virtual reality and augmented reality with WebXR and WebVR, you can do both of those with web apps too. So no matter what the device is, a PWA will work on that device. And like I said, Windows is actually great for building PWAs too, right? So with VS Code, WSL2, and the new Edge with the new Devtools, Windows is a great place to build PWAs too. All of your normal Node.js stuff will just work. And hey, you ain't even got to use WSL. You can also use PowerShell if you'd like. So yeah, Windows is a great place for building PWAs. All right, so let's go into PWA Builder. So we just talked a lot about PWAs and progressive web apps and kind of what they are. We touched on why you would want to build one, and kind of what APIs are available, all that good stuff. But now let's actually talk about how you would want to build one. So normally with building websites, there's a lot of ways to get started with building PWAs. There's a lot of ways to get started, etc. So PWA Builder is kind of meant to be that hub for building PWAs. So you go to PWABuilder.com, you'll get a screen very similar to the one I have in the screenshot here. And yeah, we are here to help you get started off on the right foot with your PWA. So PWA Builder can give you guidance while building your PWA. So you can put in the URL that your development URL that you're working on, and we will run our tests and tell you if you need a better service worker, if your web manifest is missing things, maybe your HTTPS cert is not set up correctly, etc. We can help you with that. We can also help you improve your existing PWA with some cool components and features and service workers to add to your existing PWA. And we'll go into more of that in a minute. Also, we can help you package your PWA for the app stores. So this is kind of my favorite part of PWA Builder, and I'll touch more on this in a second too. And then community too, right? So PWA Builder is an open source project. It's totally open source on GitHub. You can go to PWA Builder on GitHub and see what we're working on. You can also go into the issues, open an issue if you have an issue with PWA Builder, or if you just have a question, and we can help you there. And yeah, there's a lot of other people on our GitHub constantly helping each other in issues and stuff like that. So not only, it's not just you building your PWA, you get a community along with you that are also building PWAs and can help you in this journey. So I mentioned in the last slide that one of the things PWA Builder can do is help you get started off on the right foot with building a new PWA. So I mentioned there's a lot of ways to get started building web apps nowadays. There's many different frameworks you can choose, many different hosting technologies you can choose, even different languages, right? Do you want to use JavaScript, TypeScript, etc.? So we have the PWA starter on the PWA Builder team. So it's hosted on GitHub. It's just a GitHub repo similar to other starters such as the Angular starter or Create React app. It's our recommended way to start building a brand new PWA. It's meant to be lightweight and fast right from the start. So a common issue with building PWAs is you end up with this big monolith at the end. It's load very, very fast and it's generally slow. With the PWA Builder PWA starter, we help you get started off with a lightweight and fast environment. Simplicity, a big thing for us is simplicity, and that is built into this starter by default. Don't have any extras that you don't need. Only the things that you need are there. It's meant to be very simple to dive into, very simple to get started with, etc. It just uses web standards, so part of that simplicity, we're not using a bunch of custom stuff. It's all web standards. Everything you need to build an app is right there in the starter, but like I said, nothing extra to cloud up the mix. Best practices out of the box, everything you would want right there. And like I said, it's hosted on GitHub. Everything you need is right there, and you are ready to build a store-ready PWA with that starter. All right. Also, for improving your existing PWA, so this is another place that PWA Builder can jump in and help you with your PWA experience. So we offer a suite of components. So when you go to PWAbuilder.com, you'll see a feature store. If you click on that, you'll see a bunch of these components that we have. So first, some components that our team has built, such as the PWA install component, which we will touch on more here in a second, inking and auth. So these are web components that work in any application, no matter what framework that you may be building your PWA with. So, for example, is it Angular? Is it Ember? Is it React? All of those frameworks will these components will work in those frameworks. The install component gives you a updated browser install experience, which we will dive into more in a minute. The inking experience uses some of those APIs I talked about earlier, specifically the low latency canvas API, to give you a low latency inking experience like you may be familiar with on Windows, but actually inside your PWA. And finally, the auth component. So we built a component that allows you to easily authenticate, not only with the Microsoft Graph, but also with Google or Facebook if you wish. And finally, the Microsoft Graph Toolkit components. So you can get those components work great in PWAs, and you can get them directly through PWA Builder. It's a couple of clicks, and you have great functionality such as signing into Teams with a web component, enabling users to be able to choose which users they want to send a message to from Teams, seeing their agenda, such as the screenshot here shows, and more, all pre-designed and pre-built and ready to be dropped into your application. And finally, app distribution. So app distribution is always a big thing to think about when you're building your apps, right? So this is normally the place where you have to think about first, if I'm building just one app, is it going to only work on iOS or only work on Android or only work on Windows, or is it going to work anywhere? You know, am I going to have multiple versions of the application for multiple different operating systems? Am I going to be shipping this app just through the web, or is it going to be in the stores, etc.? So PWAs greatly simplify that. And this is one of my favorite parts about progressive web apps. So first, there's two ways that when you ship a progressive web app that users can get your application. So first, browser install. So PWAs can be installed directly from Edge. So when a user navigates to a site that is a PWA, so for example, PWABuilder.com itself, if you navigate to that in Edge, you will get a prompt in the URL bar that asks you if you want to install this application. So once you install that, the user then has your app running on their machine. It's fully integrated into Windows. Like I said, you know, it opens up as an app. It's in control panel, it's in your start screen, it's in your taskbar, etc. The only difference is the user got that from the browser directly instead of from a store or some kind of install. It's the easiest, quickest way for users to get into your experience. So you can imagine someone just goes to your URL and all of a sudden they have a prompt to where they can install your experience. It doesn't get much faster than that. And yeah, you also get access to all the same APIs. So just because someone has installed your PWA through the browser doesn't mean that you don't get access to APIs as you kind of had in the past. Now, because all of the APIs we are recommending you use are just web standards, they work anywhere the web is running. And also app stores. So, you know, users are used to getting their applications from app stores. So with PWAs, you can ship that PWA, same code base, no new application built from it, to the Microsoft Store, the Google Play Store, the Galaxy Store for Samsung devices, and PWA Builder actually makes this really easy, which we will dive into in a second. But as you can see, literally with one code base, you can ship your application to basically anywhere. So a browser or with App Store install, that pretty much covers all your potential user base. And let's remember, that's literally with one code base, one app that I built. And also, so currently, PWAs that are in the Microsoft Store are using the legacy Edge engine underneath the hood. But I'm excited to talk about that we are working on getting Chromium PWAs into the Microsoft Store. So this will mean that all of the stuff that I just talked about, all of the APIs that I just talked about, the Devtools support, so the ability to use the new Edge Devtools to debug your PWA, that will all be available to PWAs in the Microsoft Store. So we are doing a lot of work in this area, and we are very excited for PWAs that are in the Microsoft Store to be able to take advantage of all the cool things that you get from using the new Chromium version of Edge. Also, earlier we spoke on Android just for a second. I wanted to speak a little bit more about that. So with PWAs, you can ship, that one application anywhere, and that also includes Android. And the other cool thing is Android, just like Windows, is a very awesome platform for PWAs, and they also have deep integrated support for PWAs. So you can see my cat making another another entrance into the presentation here. So with Edge, we have dual screen APIs. So these APIs enable you to build dual screen experiences and kind of handle, when the user spans my application, where do I lay out things, etc. So you can see an example of that in these screenshots. PWAs, like I mentioned, work great on Android. So they show up in your app drawer. You can install them from the Google Play Store, and PWA Builder can help you get your PWA to the Play Store. And they show up in your share target. All those advanced APIs that we talked about with Windows also work on Android. And yeah, you can, with the same code base that we talked about shipping on Windows, you can also get a great experience on Android. So with that one code base, that enables you to ship a Windows and Android app, which is not something that you can say for other technologies. And all of the advanced features that will work on your Windows when it's running on Windows will also work when it's running on Android. All right, awesome. Thank you.